Good morning, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. We will give just a couple of minutes before we get started to allow for some additional people to join in. We had 150, 185 or so, so I've noticed that the number has gone from 41 to 57 in the matter of the last 10 seconds. So we'll give everyone a couple of more minutes before we get started. We should have had music going to span that awkward silence, but maybe for the next time.
Should I offer to sing, Jeff?
You're more than welcome to.
Uh, I didn't. You called my bluff.
You definitely don't want me to sing. The only way I can carry a tune is in my pocket. Yeah. In the last minute, we've gone from 41 to 96, 97, 96, 97. Okay. All right. A few more, 15 seconds or so more, and then we'll get started. All right, it's now 10:02 on the Eastern time zone in America, so let's get started. Good afternoon and good day to everyone, and welcome to NatBat's webinar, Crossroads of Change, Policy, Cybersecurity, and Global Battery Markets. We're thrilled to have over 100 participants joining us from across Europe and around the world for this timely discussion on the forces reshaping battery and energy storage markets. Thank you for your interest and carving out some time in your schedules. I'm Jeff Yambrick, co-chair of NatBat's Policy and Regulatory Committee and global consultant to the battery industry. I'm honored to host and moderate today's session along with my policy and co-chair, Emil Nussbaum, Andreas Baird, and Fred Lee from our onshoring committee, John Platt and Michael Worry from our cybersecurity committee. A special thank you to our partners in Europe, VDI, VDE, IPCEI, Recharge, VDMA, and KLIB, and Upsell for their vital collaboration in promoting and supporting this event across the region. We've assembled world-class speakers to dive into pivotal topics at the intersection of policy, security, and global markets. Let's review the agenda. First up, we'll have Gabby Coppola, automotive industry reporter at Bloomberg. Gabby will be speaking on the xEV strategy, the direction of North American automakers. Next, we'll have David Howell, Vice President of Strategic Marketing and Innovations, SMI. David will be speaking on U.S. policy and its impact on stationary energy storage systems, or BESS. Then we'll have Michael Worry from Nuvation Energy. Michael will be speaking on cybersecurity across the battery and energy ecosystems. And finally, we'll have Brett Johnson, partner at Snell and Wilmer, as well as Troy Gallen, international trade attorney, also with Snell and Wilmer. These gentlemen will be speaking on the impact of the forthcoming U.S. Supreme Court decision on tariffs, which should be very, very interesting. Each presentation, each speaker will talk for about 15 minutes. At the end of the hour, after all four presenters have spoken, we'll have a 15-minute Q&A wrap-up. At any time, please drop your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. We'll capture those and address them at the end. And if you could, please identify the presenter you're asking your question to so we can organize them appropriate. And at the end, we'll ask all the speakers to stay online so that they can address any questions that are written for them. So with that, thank you for joining, and let's get started with our first speaker, Gabby Coppola. And Gabby, take it on.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be doing this and be with you all. I'm going to talk about what is the sort of EV or powertrain strategy for automakers in the US right now. And, first off, I would say if it feels confusing, that is not you. It is an extremely confusing time because there's been so much policy whiplash in the past few years, or especially in the past year. So, just to recap, we're coming off a period during the Biden administration when a lot of automakers kind of went head over heels into the EV revolution. They saw Tesla's, valuation going up. They saw EV adoption climbing, and they said, "Wow, we got to get on board that, it's finally real, it's here." Um, Now that we have had a combination of sort of we've hit a sort of, I think, temporary ceiling, but temporary EV demand in the US because of the lack of EV infrastructure, and affordability issues, which are very real for the American consumer right now. And then so there was that sort of natural market, correction. And at the same time, obviously the Trump administration, Congress have, taken a hatchet to a lot of the policies that were really supporting EV adoption in the US market. The one that really hurt, I think, for the auto industry was losing the federal $7,500 consumer tax credit for EVs. That was a real important demand carrot, I think, for consumers. Um, and we saw a big surge in EV sales before the end of September last year, before it expired, and they've sort of been down since then. And that has made it, I think we're just a bit in this period of sort of all these different policy forces kind of churning up the, kind of natural market forces of the auto market. And so it's a little bit harder to like understand what's real. And I just to point that out or to, emphasize that point, I would say, General Motors reported earnings this week, and the CFO of GM, Paul Jacobson, said, "I don't think anyone really knows what the steady state EV demand will be in this new environment." So that's the CFO of GM. So that's to my point about it's kind of an unclear, confusing time. The other big piece of that, of course, is that the Trump administration has sort of rolled back the sort of more aggressive fuel economy rules that the Biden administration had put in place. And they've challenged the California Air Resources Board, challenged their right to set, clean air rules, which a lot of states were following. And that was driving a lot of kind of top-down, mandatory EV adoption, automakers trying to meet sales targets and quotas in order to be in compliance. Um, so there's that stick that was there. We've lost both the a little bit of the market demand. We kind of hit a ceiling on market demand, and then a lot of the kind of government policy driven, things that were driving EV adoption have been taken away. Um, so excuse me. Um, so that's what's happening, but at the same, and as a result, what we're seeing is kind of right now the market forces are really taking a front seat. And yeah, you see a lot of headlines about ICE vehicles, Stellantis bringing back the Hemi V8, GM investing in their V8 engines. For sure, Detroit is investing in ICE, they're converting, taking some of those, I think one of the plants that was going to make the Lightning is now going to make a gas-powered F-150 Lightning for Ford. GM is retooling its plant in Lake Orion in Michigan that was going to make BEVs, and now it's going to make ICE vehicles. So you're definitely seeing a leaning back, falling back on ICE because that's what the market wants, and there's demand for that, and that's what they're best at making and what's the most profitable for them, and they need to shore up their profits to kind of survive this tr very bumpy transition. But I would not take that to mean that they are giving up on electrification. Even Stellantis will say everyone feels that EVs are coming. It's just a matter of, that easy thing of timing the market, figuring out when. So what does that mean in terms of powertrain strategy? Hybrids. Hybrids are gaining tons of, they're selling really well. Um, there's some, I mean, you've heard, Toyota was kind of on this train from the beginning. They were more resistant to the EV when with all these aggressive EV targets, and now they're looking very smart and counting their money because they've just been selling hybrids and making money hand over fist. You've seen Hyundai, which they were kind of one of the ones that bet big on EVs, now going back to their plant in Georgia and retooling it to make hybrids, more hybrids and fewer EVs. You've got Stellantis, which went under the previous CEO, went very hard into BEV, now is embracing hybrids. and but also range extended vehicles, or choose your acronym, REEVs. Um, Basically an electric vehicle with the onboard gas motor to recharge the battery. This seems to be the new kind of forefront of new technology that we see automakers putting out into the market besides hybrids. Is, Ford's going to do it, Stellantis is going to do it. I'm sure I'm forgetting, I think, oh, VW's brand Scout is going to do it. So they are not giving up on EVs. It's sort of, they're just trying to cater to what the market is now. But that also does not mean, let's take a little further out. You've got, Ford has this plan in Michigan that is where they're licensing technology from CATL to make LFP batteries for a low cost EV. I think it's going to be in their midsize truck. Um, Stellantis has not completely pulled the plug on EVs. They're about to release a Jeep Recon. They've got the Wagoneer S, which is electric. And the problem for all these guys is that they actually need to make money on these cars, and I don't think they're there yet. Um, yeah. And I think, GM has probably been the most vocal and clear about of the Detroit automakers about their commitment to EVs. Their strategy, their battery strategy seems to be they're going to also use LFP batteries from CATL in the short term. They've got a new version of the Chevy Bolt, which is one of their most popular EVs coming out next year or maybe even later this year, I think. But then for 2028, they are working on a different chemistry, LMR, lithium manganese rich batteries, with LG that they believe can be kind of a homegrown, or with Koreans, homegrown, alternative to LFP. Um, so I feel like they are still trying to commercialize, trying to industrialize, EVs, and they realize that having an affordable EV is still going to be the holy grail, is still going to be what guarantees your survival in this great shakeout of the global auto industry. Um, it's just much harder to do that when you don't have the market here in the US really growing to support that. But they're taking a breather and they're working on it. I mean, Toyota, everyone kind of you had a lot of kind of environmentalists and people who were, very focused on climate change were critical of Toyota for not getting on board the EV bandwagon the last few years, but they already have a fully owned battery plant up and running in North Carolina, and they are bringing EVs too. So they were just taking a little bit longer to do it. Um, a big question I have is what's going to happen to these battery joint ventures that they all invested in during the Biden administration to get those subsidies. You've seen a lot of those being converted to ESS, stationary storage, to kind of sustain these investments or these plants because the EV demand isn't there. But I think there's still strategic questions around are all the OEMs going to go forward with this? Ford is trying to convert one of their what was going to be a battery plant with Korea's SK. They're now trying to turn it into an ESS battery plant with CATL, which is a deal that has caused some sort of consternation in Washington. Some of the China hawks don't like it, but it remains to be seen if there's really going to be a serious challenge to them doing that. GM also has an ESS business. You don't really hear about it much, but it's there. Um, I mean, so to me, those are signs that they all know that batteries and EVs are strategically critical. They're not, even though the rhetoric now is at a kind of national level is to kind of really lean into fossil fuels and this is our strategic advantage, but I don't think that's how the auto industry feels. That's just how they make money today and it's the business they know. But they know they can't rest on their laurels there. A couple of other kind of important high level kind of, I don't know, wild cards, I would say, that are kind of lingering over all of this. One is obviously the deal that, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Um, the deal that Canada made, Mark Carney's the Canadian Prime Minister made with Xi Jinping about importing, having a quota to import Chinese-made EVs into Canada. There's a lot of speculation about what this really means, how big of an impact it's going to have. I think directionally, what it signals is huge. It signals that Canada is not counting on the United States anymore to be an ally and have a robust USMCA that doesn't penalize them with tariffs. Um, and I also think it represents sort of Canada's recognition that its own declining importance to the American automakers, the Detroit automakers, because you've seen a lot of them either, idling plants because those were EV plants where the demand wasn't there, or they literally had to, in the case of Stellantis, taking some products and whether it's from Mexico or Canada, moving them to the US to abide with Trump's sort of demands for more localization and to, just kind of adapting to the tariff regime. So, if, but I am watching that very closely. I think if we've got Chery or BYD vehicles, that Americans can see just over the border coming through the US, they're going to be exposed to these cheap, shiny Chinese EVs. And I think that would be a powerful market force. It's kind of like the Japanese coming in the 80s, except with a state-backed government that doesn't care about whether or not they make a profit in the short term. So in terms of what that does to EV adoption, that's just a wild card I would highlight. The other thing, obviously, we're going to talk about tariffs, but USMCA, I touched on that. Um, that's going to be another sort of just source of chaos and uncertainty that's going to unfortunately continue for another year in the auto industry, which I really feel like is holding people back at some level from making investments and making decisions and pulling the trigger on strategies because there's just so much uncertainty. But I will say at a higher level, directionally, people get the message localization, de-risk from China. And I think we are seeing that. It's just that there's a lot of sort of conflicting policies uh, coming out of the Trump administration. Hard to tell what's going to stick and what's just kind of a bluster. And then the last point I'll make is just um, the other big question is what is Trump's position towards Chinese EVs and Chinese automakers now? He got elected on being a China hawk, but now he seems to be tamping that down because he wants to reach some sort of détente with Xi, kind of like Carney did. He's going to be meeting with Xi Jinping in April, and the signs we're getting is he's trying to kind of tamp down the hawkish rhetoric against China. What that actually means in terms of policy, we're all on pins and needles waiting to see what is going to come out of that deal. He's expressed interest in having a Chinese automaker build a plant in the United States. He said that right here in Detroit a couple of weeks ago, which is kind of, I think, lives in the nightmares of a lot of auto executives here in the US. So those are kind of the uncertainties that are kind of lording over this. There's the market forces, there's the policy, and then there's just the wild cards. And that's sort of how I'm looking at it right now.
Sorry, takes a moment to get back on camera. Thank you, Gabby. I appreciate that. Great information. I actually have a few follow-up questions I'll put in the Q&A, and we can discuss them after we get done with our presenters. Next up, we have David Howell. David, looking forward to hearing about what's going on in the BESS world. So please take it over.
Okay, let me share my screen. Hopefully you're seeing it now. Thank you, Jeff. Again, I'm Dave Howell. I'm with a company in Washington, D.C. Called Strategic Marketing Innovations, SMI. I've been here for about 2 years. Before that, I spent over 25 years of federal service, mostly with the Department of Energy and leading a lot of their battery storage work in the Department of Energy for electric vehicles and a lot of the battery and critical minerals manufacturing work. Quick note about SMI. We're right in the heart of Washington, D.C., very close to Capitol Hill. We bill ourselves as a federal marketing firm, a lobbying firm, working with clients to capture potential funding sources from different agencies like the Department of War, Department of Energy and Commerce. But one of the other things that we do is lead some battery industry or industry partnerships, and in this case, the Battery Advocacy Coalition. And this coalition serves for us the launching point for a lot of our policy work around batteries and critical minerals. So we actively engage in the relevant tax legislation, trade policy, and federal funding for technology commercialization. So a lot of the activities that I'm going to talk about here for us launch from the BAT coalition. Now let's talk a little bit about U.S. policy and its impact on battery energy storage systems, particularly for stationary energy storage. They're very similar for the transportation industry as well. Most of the legislations, include both batteries for transportation systems and stationary, and some are pointed. So it's a broad portfolio, broad landscape. When you talk about U.S. federal policy, it could come out of the Treasury Department, the tax credits that you know about, the IRA 48E, the IRA 45X production tax credits. Those are still in play. And so, as you remember over the summer, the Reconciliation Act, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, there was a lot of talk about tearing down some of these tax credits that the Inflation Reduction Act had put in place. These two survived, and that tells you a lot about the importance of this space to the administration, to the Republican leadership on the Hill. There's also the tariffs. As mentioned, you'll get a deeper dive on tariffs here in a few minutes, but that's another policy lever that the federal administration uses in order to steer, the economy to the important areas that they focus on. A lot of trade talk. That's Commerce and State Department, international critical minerals agreements, bilateral and multinational cooperation, work with the Export-Import Bank. All of that's in play. And again, levers that you need to pay attention to, that could be opportunities for you to locate manufacturing in the United States. And of course, you've heard a lot about the executive orders. We've had a lot of them over in 2025. And quite a few of those executive orders support activities around energy storage, your batteries particularly, whether it's unleashing American energy, declaring a national energy emergency, implementing the U.S.-Japan trade agreement, which includes $550 billion to establish manufacturing type plants in the United States, not just for batteries, but batteries and critical minerals are part of that. And then, of course, the data center infrastructure work that's going on. So all of these have key components that impact stationary energy storage in certain ways. I'm going to deep dive a little bit into the IRA production tax credits, and then talk a little bit about foreign entities of concern and what to expect there. So the 45X Advanced Manufacturing Production Tax Credit, it's signed into law in 2022. It includes production tax credits for clean energy components. Batteries was called out, and battery components was called out in the tax credit originally, and it's still there. On the left side, you see, the types of production plants that would qualify for this tax credit, whether it's electrode active materials, battery cells and modules, critical minerals, as you see here, aluminum, cobalt, graphite, lithium, and nickel. And on the right side, what are the tax credits? So 10% of the cost incurred with respect to the production of materials for active materials, or 10% of the amount of production of minerals. Battery cells, $35 per kilowatt hour. Battery modules, $10 per kilowatt hour. And that note here, in the case of a battery module which does not use battery cells, you can claim $45 per kilowatt hour. All of this is still intact. So it's a huge benefit to companies that are locating plants here in the United States to service both the transportation and the grid storage industries. But as I mentioned, the Reconciliation Act, the One Big Beautiful Bill, did make some changes, and I've got two slides on the changes that were imposed once that Reconciliation Act was signed into law. So the first thing, it sets a schedule for the increasing threshold percentages for various components. You see the schedule here, the percentage increases. To qualify, 60% in 2026, all the way to 85% after 2029. Then there was a phase out that they installed of the critical minerals credit. The original bill did not include a phase out of the critical minerals. It was basically in perpetuity. But under the Reconciliation Act, they installed a phase out for that particular credit. And you see the phase out schedule here. By 2034, it would be down to 0. And then it defines a material assistance cost ratio that would be a calculation of how much of your production could be applied to that production tax credit cost. And it's basically the cost of your materials and products in minus the cost of materials and products coming from a prohibited foreign entity divided by the overall cost. So it's the non-FEOC percentage that's actually eligible for these costs. Secondly, the Reconciliation Act also imposed foreign entity of concern or prohibited foreign entity or foreign influenced entity requirements on the tax credit itself. It did not have those in the original bill. And so reconciliation bill actually included these. And you're probably familiar with the foreign entity, the FEOC, the PFE or the FIE nomenclature. It starts with the covered nations, and you see those covered nations typically have been listed by the Treasury Department from the Office of Foreign Access Control or from the State Department lists or the Department of Justice list. So they're the same: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And then it includes control and definitions of control. It does use the 25% thresholds for ownership control, whether it's equity interest, board seats, or voting rights. It's very similar to the DOE FEOC regulations at this time. And then also added language regarding licensing agreement restrictions. So if there's a licensing agreement from an entity that is considered an FEOC, you have to show that you still have control over your entire process and operations. And so that's really where that comes from, that there could not necessarily be a disruption in the supply chain based on control of your licensing rights. Now, all of these are proposed. This is in, let me back up there. This is in Appropriations Act. And now the Treasury Department is now going to provide rules and guidance and release those draft guidance. And what we were told is that they're going to release draft guidance on all of this very soon for comment. And then after that comment period, they'll finalize the rules and guidance with respect to 45X production tax credits. If I'd certainly invite you to keep an eye out for their draft release, and if you have any concerns, to make comment and be part of that process. I do want to end just simply on the sourcing requirements that we're seeing, and particularly on the foreign entity of concern guidance. This is on the left side here. That's the typical. This is the IIJA section 40207 battery and critical minerals manufacturing section of that act. This is what the Department of Energy saw, and it had to actually develop draft guidance for, because this type of language showed up in the IRA 30D clean vehicle tax credit. We actually worked with Treasury to normalize that across Treasury, across IRA and IIJA. But, again, the A, B, and D includes the existing Treasury Department, State Department, DOJ list. Again, that's China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. So that's not really hard to interpret. What's hard to interpret is C and E. which what does owned by mean? What does controlled by mean? What does subject to jurisdiction? What are the metrics for all of these? And then that E part is, what does it mean to be engaged in unauthorized conduct detrimental to the national security or foreign policy? So those are the things you have to iron out. And on the right side, I'm just going to say, on both sides of the aisle, they support this. And so this is not likely going away anytime soon. And all the way from the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's where we first saw this language in the appropriations. But this continued. The 2025 Reconciliation Act, as I mentioned, for the 45X advanced manufacturing production tax credits included it. And just recently, the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, Section 842, provides language on prohibitions as well. So, this is enacted, and so the agencies have to deal with it and define it and support it. And so I don't think in the near term any of these things are going to go away. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Dave. Much appreciated. And I have some questions, maybe one for you and Gabby at the end. It won't let me actually add a question, so I'll keep it in my mind and ask it at the end.
Sure.
Next up, we have Michael Worry with Nuvation. Michael's going to talk about cybersecurity, which you think about it. I've seen a couple of television shows that maybe lean towards what Michael might be talking about that could be very scary. So, Michael, with that, please proceed.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, there's been a lot of stuff on cybersecurity on TV shows. If anyone's seen Zero Days, that's like a good capture of, the kind of risks that exist in the interconnected world we're in. So my intention here is to offer the American and Canadian perspective on cybersecurity in energy storage. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'll answer the question, why does cybersecurity matter? I'll dive into what is cybersecurity, and there's really two components to it. There's network security, and then separate from that is supply chain security. We'll talk about the NatBat Cybersecurity Committee and offer some highlights of the results and actions that we've been in. Then we're going to pick off a couple topics that we've discussed inside of that committee. One of those is a stratification of risk for components. And another is a threat matrix that we've developed inside the committee. I'm going to provide, building off some of the work David already presented. I'll talk about some of the government laws and perspectives impacting energy storage at the US state level, at the federal level, and then also in Canada. And I'll offer a few energy storage case studies. So first, by way of introduction, as mentioned, I'm the CEO and CTO of Nuvation Energy. So that means that I get to wear different suits. So sometimes I wear a suit and a tie and I'm on Capitol Hill. And then as a CTO, instead, I'm wearing a suit that is an arc flash suit. My background is as an electrical engineer out of University of Waterloo in Canada. I was born and raised in Canada, and now I live in the US. Nuvation's been in business for 28 years, founded back in 1997. And I co-chair the NatBat Cybersecurity Committee alongside John Platt. Quick moment on who Nuvation is, just so you know who's speaking. So all of Nuvation's products are designed and manufactured in US and Canada, and we do three main things. First, we do battery management systems. These are the electronics that sit closest to the battery cells and keep the battery safe. We do energy management solutions, which are energy controllers for a variety of applications. And we have energy storage design services. This is where our customers hire us in order to design an energy storage system to their requirements, and the customer keeps the resulting IP. All right, so diving in, why does cybersecurity matter in energy storage? So I think this audience is probably pretty familiar with that lithium batteries need to be operated within specific parameters. And if they get outside of those parameters, they can get quite unhappy to the level of thermal runaway. The primary purpose of a battery management system, which is the product my company makes, is to prevent lithium battery fires. The flip side of that is that the same way a BMS is used to keep a battery safe, a BMS can also be manipulated by a bad actor in order to cause battery fires. So the risks of cybersecurity, if you're not paying attention sufficiently, first is you can have a bad actor intentionally operate the system to cause a fire or structural damage. That bad actor can also manipulate the asset to cause issues outside of the energy storage system, impacting the grid, causing grid instability and/or loss of power. Sometimes these ripples can cascade to cause bigger issues. And a third, even without an interaction from a bad actor, is we have a couple examples of systems being shut down by government organizations who are looking to enforce the cybersecurity laws of their country, state, or municipality. And so even without a bad actor involved, one needs to pay attention to cybersecurity and be compliant with that for operating. So let's define what is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity overall is the practice of protecting systems and devices from digital attacks and unauthorized access. Within that, there's really two parts. So the first is network security, and this is what most people think of when they think of cybersecurity. This is the conventional technologies and policies to protect against remote bad actors and cyber attacks. This is like hacking from someone remote. So an example of that is Russia hacks into and shuts down a Ukraine power station. The second piece is supply chain security. And this is the methods to exclude a bad actor from the supply chain who could have motivation to tamper with or embed a backdoor that provides unwarranted access and bypasses network security. An example of that is Israel infiltrates the Hezbollah supply chain. So the reason why supply chain security is so important is because it doesn't matter how good your network security is. If you haven't also done supply chain security, your network security is easy to defeat. The easiest example is, if a thief is already inside your house, it doesn't matter how elaborate the lock is on your front door, the thief is already past that network security. So this is why supply chain security is so critical. Where your electronics are designed, where your code is written, the origin of the design is the important piece inside of your supply chain security aspect. So let's talk a little bit about the NatBat Cybersecurity Committee. So this committee, we started this in the summer of 2025. We've seen a lot of great momentum in government relations work. All of this inside of ensuring our critical infrastructure and specific electric grid is secure. So we've done a lot of policy engagement, ongoing education of elected officials. So I've been many times to DC, Ottawa, Toronto, meeting with government officials in order to talk about what's going on inside of energy storage. We've got very good regulatory momentum. So on a state level, and I have a slide on this, states continue to tighten restrictions on foreign adversary electronics. And we're now starting to see on the utility level, the utilities are increasingly writing into their RFPs requirements for domestic or allied control systems. And they're starting to pay attention at both the design level and the manufacturing level. So it's no longer enough just to have a Made in USA or Made in Canada sticker on it. People are actually leaning in and want to know where these products were designed. We've had sessions inside the committee on cybersecurity standards. Here in North America, 62443 is the most common cybersecurity standard that we see. The committee has talked about FIUC and IRA impacts. David covered this already in a lot of detail. And we continue to see great federal attention. So the U.S. Select Committee on China continues to raise national security concerns, Chairman Mulliner there. And energy storage has been included in a formal request for commerce investigation. And I have a slide that shows more detail on that. So let's talk about a few topics that we've covered inside the committee. So one is stratification of risk, right? So we have, finite attention that we can put towards an issue like this. So we need to focus that in the area that makes the biggest difference. So what we've done is we've stratified the components inside of an energy storage system into high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So high risk is your control electronics. So this is your battery management system, power conversion system, your EMS, thermal control systems, anywhere where there's circuitry or software running. These are your high risk control electronics because this is where backdoors can be embedded. Over on the other side, you have your low risk components. So this is things that don't have electronics. These are not the smarts. And so this is mostly passive components. So for example, the battery cells themselves, the steel container, bus bars, wiring, a lot of equipment like that. Because there's no electronics, you can't hide a back door anywhere there. So those aren't zero risk, but certainly lower risk. And so we've been guiding government inside of this of, we still need to buy battery cells from China because that's where a lot of them are made. We don't yet have sufficient supply chain in North America or Europe to do that. However, we definitely have sufficient supply chain to manufacture all of our own control electronics domestically. And so that's where we've been guiding governments in our interactions. Also within the committee, we developed this threat matrix. And so this looks at many of the aspects of how an electronic product is made. And what we're highlighting is on the left-hand side is your higher risk factors. So this is the control and ownership of the electronics company. Next is the hardware and software design, like where, like in what country was this product originally designed? And anything that's a foreign adversary puts you into this high risk category. As we move across, we get into chip design, which can also be important as these components form the main processing of the circuit board. It is possible to also hide electronic backdoors at a chip level. And so within that, you're going to see policies that require US and allied chip companies to be used. And then out on the right-hand side here, we've got manufacturing, the board manufacturing, and the IC manufacturing. And while this still carries some weight in the risk assessment, it is considered less important. And within that, we highlight that foreign design electronics are not made more safe by being manufactured in North America. So we've talked about that a lot in the committee, that it used to be that if a product was labeled made in USA or made in Canada, it was sort of considered safe. And that's really a false sense of security because if a foreign adversary takes their design and manufactures in the US, if there's an electronic backdoor in the originating design, it is still there in the US manufactured product. We also talked a lot about white labeling. And so there's, with the laws that have come forward, it's created a motivation in the industry for people to white label foreign adversary products. And so they take the same foreign adversary design, manufacture in the US, put an American logo on it, but it still carries the same threat risk. Here's a capture of US states. There is pending federal legislative language that'll be put in place. Many states, though, aren't waiting for that and have already moved forward and passed state level laws that restrict or at least scrutinize relationships with foreign adversaries and restricted either in energy storage or more generally in US infrastructure. On a federal level, there continues to be strong bipartisan support to restrict field control electronics from accessing critical infrastructure. This was a letter that was written just in November. And so this is 55 Republicans warning Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick that Chinese manufactured solar panels and battery inverters can threaten public safety, economic security, and national defense. So there continues to be, this is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. There continues to be really strong bipartisan support for this. In Canada, there's also been a lot of action. Canada has strong alignment with the US regarding security concerns with foreign adversaries. Ontario has shown particular leadership in this category. Ontario is the largest province inside of Canada and has the majority of BESS installations within Canada. And so just in the last year, the Premier Ford government in Ontario has really moved forward quickly. Bill 5 enables the Minister of Energy, this Minister Lecce at the moment, gives him the ability to put regulations in place to restrict foreign adversaries in energy storage. And then they passed Bill 40, and it was kind of cool because Bill 40 provides the funding for Bill 5. So Bill 5 is the restriction preventing foreign adversaries from being there. And there's a pragmatic recognition that a lot of the appeal of a foreign adversary's electronics are often cheaper. And so if we're going to require a domestic solution, that will have some small impact on the installed cost. And so Bill 40 provides funding in order to ensure pragmatically that can be done in industry. And then Bill 72 is the Buy Ontario Act, which encourages the purchasing of Ontario products. This is an example of a case study. And so in Texas, Texas has a strong Texas Lone Star Act, which restricts interactions with foreign adversaries in critical infrastructure. And there was a large site being installed with energy storage systems from CATL, and Texas pays attention. And so Texas noticed this, and the Attorney General there, Ken Paxton, launched an investigation into the use of the CATL energy storage systems in Texas. Here's another example. So this was back in February 2024, and this was kind of the start where people were starting to pay attention to cybersecurity. And this was a CATL energy storage system that was installed at Camp Lejeune. And the interesting thing to really note here is at the time that this was installed, this followed the rules and regulations that existed at the time. However, after commissioning, a number of US senators said, hey, wait a minute, we don't like the idea of having a Chinese energy storage system at one of our military bases. And so they shut it down after the fact. So I'm highlighting this because I want people to pay attention to not just the laws that they exist now, but also the directionality of concern that exists in US and Canada. So the point of that is that even if a system is installed compliant with existing laws, if it incorporates foreign adversary components, the US government can reach in there, deem it's a national security risk, and shut it down. I wanted to just got 2 slides left here. So we talk about how policies are implemented. And so within the NatBat Cybersecurity Committee, we developed this hierarchy of influence. Starts with government laws. And that's what we spent most of 2025 on. Now in 2026, we're moving down to the next level where utilities, IPPs, and facility owners are writing RFPs. They should be doing that compliant with the laws. We're making sure that they're familiar with them. And then developers and people downstream from that order and design energy systems based on the RFP requirements. So in closing, some key takeaways. So first, cybersecurity is comprised of both network security and supply chain security. Both are required to keep our grid safe. Where something is designed is more important for cybersecurity than where it happens to be manufactured. Point 3, it's essential to ensure the control electronics used are compliant with applicable laws, regulations, and RFP requirements. If you don't follow that, you could get hacked or you could be shut down by a government looking to enforce their cybersecurity rules. And for the North American market, it's best to choose a domestic North American control electronics with a pedigree of field deployments, strong cybersecurity compliance, and are both designed and manufactured in North America. Those are my prepared remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very interesting, and I have a question or two for you at the end, but we will move on as per the schedule to Brett and Troy from Snell and Wilmer. Gentlemen, I will turn it over to you. Look forward to hearing.
Sounds good. Troy, if you could pull up the slides after Michael gets down, and all the presentations have been wonderful so far. And Michael and David, we live in the same world as you guys do, and it's very interesting. And so, my one recommendation off of what you guys have said is that when you get the inquiries from the government, take them serious. It's not a joke, and making sure you give some good, fulsome, well thought out responses on anything dealing with international controls and cybersecurity. So we run into people all the time who don't respond appropriately to the government. So just I'm going to give my little 2 cents on that one. But going now to the U.S. Supreme Court and the tariffs, and we'll get through this pretty quickly. As Troy, let's go to the next slide real quick. And by the way, I should introduce myself. Brett Johnson and Troy Galan, both international trade attorneys at Snell and Wilmer. We have been doing a significant amount of tariff mitigation work for clients for the last couple of years. But most notably, the last year, obviously, it's picked up significantly in people trying to address the tariffs that have impacted various industries, and obviously the battery industry. The Supreme Court case, which was several months ago, there was, and many people don't know, one was the Learning Resources versus Trump, and that dealt with some education toys that kids use. There's another one that deals with a wine company. The oral argument in this is like the World Series for us legal nerds. So if you ever want to watch or hear a good presentation, Google that for sure. But the real issue is that the power of the executive, the President of the United States, versus the power of the legislature to take certain action and direct how policy is done in the United States. The president has several powers within the tariff world. Sometimes we hear about 232 and 301. Those are two different tariff regimens. This is in regard to the IEEPA, or reciprocal tariffs. And you might remember when President Trump was at the Rose Garden, the old Rose Garden, and went through the list of countries and said these are the reciprocal tariffs. That is what we're actually talking about. The wine company and the education company brought a lawsuit at the Court of International Trade. There's other lawsuits at the federal circuit, which is inside Washington, D.C. And at those times, they determined that the president did not have the authority to use IEEPA in the manner that it was, basically across the board. So that is what is going to be presented. Again, it goes to a much larger issue of constitutional powers. So everybody who's betting on when that opinion is going to be coming out, you shouldn't hold your breath because of the significance of this case to everything that is happening in this administration and, quite honestly, future administration. So this will change the law significantly one way or the other. Next slide, please. So at the oral argument, the justices were concerned, obviously, with the tariffability and that there really wasn't an emergency effect that kind of triggered the IEEPA, that this was being done for other things. And during that process, the justices from across the spectrum asked the same question of the attorneys. Well, what happens if we rule in your favor and say that these tariffs were not constitutional? And the response from all three attorneys were, we don't know because it's never happened before, and the customs system is not set up to address this. So they all agreed. The government agreed, and the parties' counsels agreed. The one thing that the attorneys for the wine company and the education company said for sure, though, is my clients are getting paid back. And everybody kind of laughed. But there was a truth to it because they had brought these cases in the Court of International Trade and were pursuing it up to the Supreme Court and addressed whether or not they were going to get the funding. So again, the court, in its opinion, is most likely not going, if it rules that they were unconstitutional, is not going to provide an automatic refund and everybody gets their money back. Instead, there's going to be a process, and right now the only process is the Court of International Trade. So let's talk about next steps. Right. So again, as I mentioned, the court did not touch the 232 tariffs. So the steel issues, other things like that, 301 tariffs, did not touch about anti-dumping. These are really the IEEPA, which are the reciprocal tariffs. And if you want to bring also in the fentanyl tariffs. So the real question is how are we going to protect past payments that were tied to IEEPA, which means back in February, March timeframe to the current until the Supreme Court actually rules. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy to quickly go through some of the steps. Troy, you're on mute.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you. I want to quickly introduce you to the term of liquidation. It has existed in international trade and import and export historically, but it has come to the forefront based on the Supreme Court case that Brett talked to us about. The way it works is, as you may be familiar, your product arrives into a port in the United States. It could be an airport, it could be a port. By ship, it arrives, it gets processed by customs. It usually takes about a couple of days. It can take up to a couple of weeks, and the product ultimately gets released and it gets sent to your warehouse or your customer's warehouse that you sold it to in the United States. What you may not know, though, is that after your product has been released from customs continues to process that entry. They're looking at all the documentation that you submitted, the country of origin, the harmonized tariff schedule code, that HTH code, the amount of tariff that you declare, the value of that product, and that keeps getting reviewed. Customs has, by law, up to a year, and by process, up to 314 days to continue reviewing that information that you submitted. Once that process ends, that liquidation ends, your entry is closed. Again, it's almost a year after you arrive. You're obviously not keeping track of this. It's unlikely for your customs broker to keep you updated on this. It's a ministerial process that continues to happen. But the relevance is that once the liquidation ends, and your entry is closed, it becomes final by operation of law. It's the equivalent of the statute of limitation having expired. And the concern was that if the Supreme Court rules that the IEEPA tariffs are unconstitutional and your entries have liquidated, you would not be able to get a refund since they have been shut down, since they have been finalized by operation of law. So this leads to the question. So that is why importers rush to file after the oral argument that Brett described a minute ago. Over 100 companies within a couple of days went ahead and filed a suit in the Court of International Trade for two reasons. One of them was wanted to protect their rights, wanted to make sure that if the tariffs were unconstitutional, that they would be able to get a refund. And part of that was to suspend liquidation. So I mentioned over 100 companies filed within a couple of days, and it's notable that as of today, around 900 companies have already filed. So this activity continues. They were seeking to suspend liquidation. They were asking the government to issue, the judge to issue a preliminary injunction ordering the government to stop the liquidations, to extend that 314 days period, basically to maintain the status quo as it is. Again, the rationale with doing that was that CBP has no experience with refunding tariffs at this scale. They should be suspended. Again, trying to avoid that statute of limitation, that liquidation process from continue, and avoiding that customs. CBP would ultimately argue, well, you're not, even though their tariffs are unconstitutional, you're not allowed to a refund because, again, liquidation has ended. That was the original motivation for that rush of lawsuits. Ultimately, the Court of International Trade, that lower court, the trial level court, denied that motion for a preliminary injunction. It basically said the government has represented in their filings to this court that we have the ability to reopen those entries, even though liquidation has occurred. Which again, that was a question, whether that would make it final. The court says we have the authority to reopen it, and the government is saying to us that that they recognize that authority, that there is not a dispute. So based on those representations, the court said there is no need to issue this preliminary injunction. Ultimately, if the tariffs are unconstitutional and your liquidation has happened for you, we're able to address that issue when the time comes. That said, the language that the court used wasn't completely clear, which takes us to where we are now in the aftermath of that ruling. The immediate fear that rush to find those lawsuits within a couple of days, because of that fear that your ability to get a refund would be eliminated, that went away to some degree. It was reduced because the court provided some certainty, but it was not a fully developed opinion where there's no question. It was not fully eliminated. Number two, the language that the court used referred to its authority, its jurisdiction to be able to address these refunds. In other words, they can address the entries of those that are litigants before the court. There's been some confusion, and Brett will get into this, as to some interpretations where people understood that this would actually create a universal refund program. Well, that's not the case. The court, it was a short opinion. They never got into that. So there's no automated refund process. So really the riskiness has shifted from legal extension to what your risk tolerance is. With that, I'll let Brett explain to you that.
Perfect. Thanks, Troy. And I know that we're almost out of time and want to be respectful for questions. So we're going to wrap up pretty quickly here. Hopefully the presentation is going to be provided by the organizers so you guys can see some of this. But there is an argument out there that you don't have to file something with the Court of International Trade to preserve your rights. And many arguments, Troy, we're going to pull that back up, please. So one thing is that they're saying that you can go forward and wait for a couple of years. There's some commentary out there. That is a very risky action. We do not necessarily subscribe to it, because if they are wrong, you do not have your right to your tariffs anymore based off of something called the statute of limitations. So if you do not preserve your rights accordingly, and again, that is also a gamble, it's like an insurance policy, then you might be out. So a lot of and we'll go to the next slide there, please, is gambling as to what you need to do. So if you have a significant amount of tariffs that are outstanding, or there are suppliers that have been provided to you and they passed on to tariffs to you, and you have significant amount of money on that, you do want to ensure that there's going to be some sort of protection and do that analysis internally. It's a case-by-case basis. There's no real big like set stone that you can absolutely do. Again, the best case scenario is you file with the Court of International Trade. That then gives the court jurisdiction over your case and then allows you to go forward in that process because they said that they will handle it once the Supreme Court rules. If you wait and think that customs is going to come up, again, the customs system right now is not set up for it. They may come up with a system, but again, that is rolling the dice. Next slide, please. So again, these are the practical consequences of waiting. Again, worst case scenario, you are forfeiting your refunds, and if it is significant amount of tariffs that you've paid, you're gonna want to make sure that that's protected. The next slide, real quick, talks about some documentations that you're going to want to do. Make sure, and that goes into your analysis as to whether or not you're actually going to want to file. Basically, how much IEEPA funds have you actually done? You also want to map out who the importer of record is, look at your contracts to determine the delivery terms, who's actually responsible for it, look at your purchase orders, was there a new line item that was for tariffs, and then forcing your suppliers, if you're not the importer of record, to actually take some time. Next slide, please. One thing that we are actually seeing is, and the reason why Secretary of Treasury does not believe that he's going to have to, or the United States is going to have to pay back all of the IEEPA tariffs. So let's say it's 200 billion. I think the Secretary of Treasury said he's going to have to pay back half of that on the worst case. And the reason being is that there were a lot of scams, a lot of schemes to get around the tariff mitigation. We've seen them all. And for people who acted illegally over the last year to get around the tariffs, those individuals are not going to be best suited to go and ask for their tariff back, that whatever they did pay, because they acted illegally. And there will be audits or reviews of the different entries and the determination of, hey, you were paying this amount back in 2024. In 2025, all of a sudden the value of your price went down to a fraction to avoid the tariffs. Why was that? And there's other schemes accordingly. So make sure before you throw stones at the U.S. government, make sure you're not living in a glass house for sure. But with that, I made our time, caught up our time. So we'll turn it back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you both, Brett and Troy. Much appreciated. So if all the speakers can stick around and turn their cameras on, we do have several questions. A few have been answered, and we'll cover those at the end. But the first one from Pamela. Pamela asks, can you discuss, and I'll give this one over to probably Dave and perhaps Gabby, and I have a similar question, Pamela, so thank you. Can you discuss how the U.S. government's strategy regarding the increased focus on and national interest designation of critical minerals will impact the border storage market scenario? And before you answer that, Dave, my addition to that question is we've scaled back EV incentive policy, et cetera, but we're ramping up the critical gathering of minerals and materials. Can we look at this as a strategic pivot, or is it an internal contradiction?
Strategic pivot? No, I don't think it's a pivot, actually. Even under the Biden administration, we did the 100-day supply chain report, both for batteries, high-capacity batteries, and for critical minerals. So this is sort of upping the game a little. I would say the Trump administration has certainly upped the game on critical minerals. A lot of the Commerce and State Department work on international critical mineral agreements, on bilateral and multinational agreements, even the Export-Import Bank, support and I'm going to use the term domestication of the critical minerals industry, including our free trade agreement partners, right? And so a lot of the all of the FEOC type language really is focused on China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And what you see happening is, particularly for this administration, is reaching out to our free trade agreement partners, getting those agreements in place, having funds available to establish sources that we don't have of critical minerals outside of batteries, inside of batteries, and establishing that supply chain. So I actually think what they're doing now, it just literally supports the products that are needed, whether they're commercial products or defense products that have critical minerals in them. And now I'm going to use the term materials because a lot of these things are a lot of the support that you see is even on the broader upstream, not only about extraction and refining of the critical mineral, but making the critical products like precursors and components. So seem to be hand in hand. I wouldn't read too much into the EV part of it because critical minerals are very broad.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Next question we have is from Dave McChesney. It says, David, how can the tax credits for battery modules be realized when using Chinese cells? Have there been any changes to the talks around significant transformation definition when using Chinese cells for U.S. assembled battery packs?
Yeah, so if you're looking for the production tax credit, if you're using Chinese cells and you want to apply for the assembly, the pack, 10% or $10 per kilowatt hour, that's going to be very difficult because it literally is that material qualification calculation that you're going to have to achieve. And if your product in to that pack is if it's 80% FEOC, I just don't see a way you're going to qualify. Okay. So, and if you're talking about an electric vehicle pack, typically the cell cost is about 75 to 80% of the total pack cost. So, I mean, that would be tough. If you're talking about an energy storage BES type system that's lower, maybe around 40% of the cost. But you take a look at the percent of domestic or FTA content, it will be very difficult to qualify.
Okay, thank you. And another one for you, David. And don't worry, Brett, Troy, Michael, and Gabby, I've got a couple for you. If you're feeling left out. So Carol, I'm not even going to attempt your last name. It says, I have heard conflicting information about how many data centers are planning to include BESS as part of their energy plan as the primary backup power systems. Do you have any resources or information about the upcoming plans, including BESS at data centers? And there's a couple of folks who've weighed in too, but please, Dave.
Sure. Very, very great question. A lot of that's being teased out right now. We've met with operators of data centers, designers of data centers, owners of data centers, done that with the Department of Energy, Office of Electricity, had some roundtables around it. And there's no set answer at this point. There's no standard answer. However, what we're getting is there's sort of three types of energy storage needed or power storage needed. One is on the rack, that ultracapacitor type capability to provide high power discharges, high power charges the battery within seconds or 2-second time frames. So that's next to the GPU. You might be able to supply some of that mitigation work with power electronics and things of that nature, but they do think they're going to need some type of storage device to help. And then, of course, behind the meter storage, and a lot of that is for power quality, right? Data centers need a little bit more exacting power quality.
Yep.
And so they're looking at how to use battery storage for that. And what other things that they can use in order to make sure that the power is the type of power that they need. And then, of course, in front of the meter storage, larger systems, backup power, and capability for safe shutdowns if needed. And the rough order of measure is that for a safe shutdown, they need about 4 hours of storage in order to shut down a major AI data center. All of these things are being worked out, and look for meetings in the future, Department of Energy and others, to start working out some of these requirements.
Yeah, I'll chime in
Thank
here
you.
as well.
Yeah, please.
So, one of our customers, E2 Companies, has developed a very innovative dual conversion technology for exactly this application of data centers and especially AI data centers. Due to the very high uptime requirements, as well as the power fluctuations that can come off these NVIDIA chips, you can get a 60, 70% load dump. And our grid is not designed to handle that kind of power change. And so it effectively requires energy storage. And then to get up to the many hours, what E2's done is they've combined a high power battery energy storage system with a genset. And so, the battery handles the fluctuations and keeps the whole data center online until the genset comes up and takes over. And so that I think is the best combination of technologies.
All right, very good. And our own Jim Greenberger, Executive Director of NatBat, weighed in. NatBat is conducting a study of the best market for data centers, which should be available to all NatBat members in early Q2 of 2026. So thank you for that, Jim. The next question from Rob Privet. Can you comment on the regs for U.S. defense, lithium-ion battery, and NDAA, etc.? And we'll
Yeah,
throw this.
I'll take that one. So, yeah, NDA language, not a surprise to the Department of Defense. There was work on it earlier than 2026. However, now it's real. And so, have met with some folks in the Department of War at the Office of Secretary for Operational Energy, as recently as last week, to discuss the timeline of implementing the NDA language. And what you should expect is they're working out the guidance and how they're going to process that language. Probably you'll see some draft language around the April timeframe for comment before it's actually finalized and implemented.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. And we'll throw this one to Gabby. Another one from Rob Privet. How would the Canadian deal with Chinese EVs sold in Canada to be safe? So, Gabby, I'm basically saying with Chinese EVs coming over to China, or excuse me, to Canada, I'm assuming they're going to be required to meet all of the Canadian safety regulations, much like our FVSS regulations.
FMVSS.
FM,
Yes.
thank you. Acronyms are not my strong suit.
Um, well, I know that part of the deal that Prime Minister Carney made was to kind of try to fast track the process of qualifying the cars, like because that can
Right.
sometimes take a very long time. And I think the Canadian government said they were going to try to get it done in like 2 months, so really fast track it for people. Um, So yeah. And then, another thing people point out to me about that is, even I had this question. Well, the US passed or I guess the Commerce Department passed a rule under the end of the Biden administration about banning cars with Chinese software from the United States because they really do see cars as potential sort of just like espionage machines or, gathering data on us and our surroundings and sending them back. And so the Commerce Department did that, and the Trump administration had, kept that in place. So I think, but like I said earlier, I think the person who wrote that rule recently resigned from the Commerce Department. So I'm also sort of still, like I said earlier, questioning how hawkish we are as a country right now. But in terms of safety, I feel like yeah, I mean, I think that there's still a lot of issues to be worked out there, but I think it seems like the Canadian government is serious about working them out.
Yeah. And from my perspective, as somebody who worked in China, worked for a Chinese automotive maker, I know that when it comes to the standards in which a vehicle gets designed to, they are much further. I don't want to use the term behind, but they are less stringent than what we have here in the U.S. and Canada. So to simply import a Chinese vehicle here in mass, one and two, fine, no problem. 50,000, 40,000, you start to wonder, okay, that 2 month time frame to homologate, is it one model, 10 models, 50 models? Will be very interesting, and it'll be an interesting challenge for the Canadian government. Will you get the slides? Yes, we will have them available, and I will talk with Patty about that today. Sebastian said, is it conceivable that foreign entities of concern develop cyber threats upstream to cells and at the material levels.
So
So,
I can chime in there.
yeah,
So
please.
as an electrical engineer, is it conceivable? Sure. Because you could think about, embedding electronics at like the cell level or something that could
Right.
provide an attack surface for cyber threats. It's less likely, because these are passive components, so it's not possible to like hide electronics in just raw elements, in rare earth minerals or something like that. It is possible you could do it at the cell level, but it's unlikely because it would be pretty easily to catch something like that.
Yeah. I would only add that I've worked with a few companies in the last few years that are looking at putting chips on the cell to help
Yep,
with longevity and everything. So that might be the case that you would run into that might say that yes, that would be a problem. So
correct.
Clint, Brett, you need to reset your clock.
No, it's always set at happy hour.
All
Sorry.
right, fair enough. Let's see. Does cybersecurity issues change in any way when considering the increased use of BTM solutions for data centers, including BESS?
Um, So, uh, so the cybersecurity issue is still there. So if you're behind the meter or front of the meter, it's still the same risk of foreign adversary electronics. And especially with AI data centers, traditionally it's been that behind the meter means the system is smaller, and front of the meter are the large scale systems. With data centers, this is now crossed the other direction, that we have behind the meter systems that are multiple gigawatts in and of themselves. And so it really carries the same cybersecurity risks.
Thank you. Very good. And Rob Privet, excuse me, the Canadian question is one of cybersecurity. And Rob, I'm not sure if that was a statement or a question. Unless anybody has anything to say about that one, we will assume Rob is making a statement. All right. I'm sorry if you have something, Michael. My apologies.
In general, Canada is pretty closely aligned with the US in many of these cybersecurity issues.
All right. And while we're on, Michael, so I wrote a question that says, and apologies if it may not be exactly grammatically correct. How can we work more closely with our European allies? Are the EU rules and regulations, policies, whatever you want to call them, aligned with US and Canada? And if not, how could we, should we align better when it comes to the future of electrification, battery, cybersecurity? And I guess would they trust us?
I think there's some overlap inside of that, like within cybersecurity regulations and so forth. It's not a perfect overlap. I think it has similar intentions. It would certainly be ideal if EU and North America converged on a single cybersecurity standard. Here in North America, it's most commonly is 62443, but we haven't fully converged on that. There's some RFPs that reference other standards as well.
Okay. And I saw this one last night, but Gabby, maybe you can take this one. The headline from Car and Driver was Tesla will stop building Model S and X, excuse me, this year to focus on Optimus robots instead. I guess my question is, do you see this as an opportunity for other EV makers to fill the gap that Tesla is vacating?
Um, I would say yes, absolutely. And that's already been happening. I mean, if you look at if you want an indication, you can look at I think it's the California puts out, I want to say it's the Dealer Association in California puts out a report, every quarter, maybe monthly, that kind of shows California is the biggest EV market in the US. And you've seen like companies like Hyundai has been gaining share. Um, I think absolutely. And the fact that the incumbent automakers no longer have to basically subsidize Tesla by paying fines for not complying with the fuel economy rules, that was another sort of kind of advantage that Tesla had is that his competitors
Right.
were subsidizing it through regulatory fines. So it's not that Tesla doesn't have still have a big lead, but they're strategically choosing to not focus on this. I mean, I think what Elon Musk said last night, not on top of investing in a chip factory and focusing on AI and robots, was that the only car they're investing in the future, I think, is the Cybercab, is an autonomous vehicle. So, um, he's prioritizing, he's allocating his resources differently, and definitely feels like a shift away from EVs. So the question is it, hopefully, is it going to be just Chinese companies that take up that space, or is
Right,
it
exactly.
Koreans,
Yes.
Japanese,
Mhm.
Americans? That's the fight. That's the battle.
Yeah. So Dave Howell, I want to get a hold of you later on this week or early next week to talk about an idea I've had for some time. So
Sure.
Rob Privet clarified his question, but he did add another that says, however, Canada is now considering inviting Chinese EVs into the country. Does this represent a cybersecurity issue?
I think it's something to pay attention to,
Yep.
as when you have electronics from a foreign adversary, you're running afoul of supply chain security risks. So it's something that I think the Canadian government will need to pay attention to.
Very good. James asked, will recording of this excellent webinar be available and when? I will throw that over to Patty and Paula. My apologies. I believe the answer is yes, but Patty and Paula want to just type the answer in. That would be great. And again, Brett, Troy, you guys did such a great job. I certainly don't want to leave you out of this. And my question really boils down to my late night catching up on my reading, which is if there's a text or a public statement suggesting tariffs were imposed as a personal retaliation, how does that evidence actually play in court? And does it matter under the standard of review judges apply in foreign affairs, national security cases? Or is it a real fight simply whether the IEEPA authorizes tariffs at all?
It's if the law authorize it. The commentary from elected leaders around whether or not the tariff, it all depends on the record that was created that then substantiates it. So if it's not in the executive order, you can tweet out whatever you want. But if it's not in the executive order, it's not the Department of Commerce record. It's the court's going to consider it irrelevant.
Wow, that gives me a whole big opening to my future on how I communicate with people.
That's right.
And there were a few questions that were answered while the conversation was going on or the presentations were going on. And James had a question about every data center has a UPS system, which is a BSS. And I guess, Dave, if you want to tackle that one, so the question is it a BSS system or is it something else?
Well, it could be something else. It could be a generator, right?
Yep.
But right now, I think the going concerns are either doing both hybrids or are using some type of BES system, like I said, behind the meter, in front of the meter, to mitigate some of the issues. So yes, there could be some alternatives, but right now BES is one of the key components of the strategy.
All right,
Yeah,
very
I
good.
can chime in here because we do a
Yes,
lot
please.
of AI data center work, and really, a data center is a combination of two energy applications. So, one energy application of very high resiliency. So, the grid wasn't designed to provide, the many nines of uptime that data centers want, and so you have to have some backup solution for that. Generators take many minutes to come online, so battery energy storage is really a solution to that. The second application is the high power fluctuation of these data centers, which gensets, transformers, the grid were not designed to handle. And so to slow down that power slew rate, you require battery energy storage systems for that. So it's effectively the same as how BESS are great at frequency regulation or renewables integration to handle that power slew rate. They can now use that same technology for AI data centers.
Very good. And David Howell, you've already answered this one, but I just want to make sure everyone has seen it. The question from Clint O'Connor, how can you make a battery without battery cells regarding the $45 per kilowatt hour credit? And David, you said it also includes flow batteries and technologies such as iron air, iron oxide for stationary. And then another one for David. You're a very popular guy today. From Carol. I have heard conflicting information about how many data centers are. We may have already answered that one. All right,
We
sorry about
did.
that.
Yeah.
And I think that might wrap it up. Oh, nope, we have one from our own John Platt. How much of the IEPA tariffs have already been liquidated? And is there anything at all that can be done about them? So our friends Troy and Brett.
Yeah, that was a softball. We'll call John Platt out there. It depends, right? So basically, using the math that Troy was talking about, 314 days, The February and March of last year tariffs have already been liquidated by probably December of this time frame. The problem is that when we're looking at clients' data, and this is one of customs tactics, is that they've been advancing up the liquidation period significantly, even by just a few months. We looked at some yesterday, for example, in that context. So I wouldn't say it's probably 20-30%, I would imagine at this point, but you really do have to look, because that's definitely going to be one of the triggers that you're going to want to consider on a case-by-case basis.
Well, thank you, everybody. We are a little over time, but that's quite all right. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think a lot of good information has been shared and discussed, so that's fine. So to answer some of the questions, the presentations and the recording will be made available. And with that, I want to thank Gabby, Dave, Michael, Brett, Troy, my co-chairs, Emil, Fred, Andreas, John, and Michael again, for all the outstanding work that we put into this to get this to happen. Also, special thanks to Patty and Paula for helping us organize and manage all of this. So, to all the attendees, thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. And we do have an annual conference coming up in a couple of weeks, so if you're interested in joining that, Pat, or attending, please reach out via the website for more information. So with that, I will wish everybody a good day, good morning, good afternoon, and a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
See you. Thank you.